people don't want to talk about their mental issues. So the first step for me is to actually say or confide in somebody else that's close to you, that you can trust, that you have a problem, whether it's financial, whether it's depression, whatever the case is, and that I think is the first step, is confiding in somebody that you can trust and relate to. So when I just recently moved to a new team in Russia, the club itself went through some financial issues, and I wasn't paid for almost 6 months. So to be a foreigner in a place like Russia, and to not be getting paid and worried about your future, your family is with you, that probably from a financial point of view was my biggest strain and struggle. From a mental point of view, picking up a serious injury when I was about 32, 33, and then not getting my contract renewed at Sundowns, that was probably my biggest mental issue that I had. And I was lucky enough to have a very supportive wife and family base that got me through that. But yeah, those were probably the two occasions, for very separate reasons, where I had to really pull myself together. I'm rather an introvert, so I kind of keep a lot of my troubles to myself until they build up, and that's not a healthy thing to do generally, because you might come to a point where you just explode. And so to have people again that you can confide in and seek advice and build a nice entourage of people. 4 times like this. Building an entourage is not about the good times. Building an entourage is to prepare yourself for the bad times, where you can get good, solid, sound advice from people who again have you in mind and not nobody else. And yeah, look, generally, I mean, if you haven't taken advantage of these 3 months of sitting at home, basically, then I'm afraid you've missed out on a huge opportunity to improve yourself. And it's not only about taking a course, learning things, but even just, again, from a mental point of view, self-reflection is very important, and there can be no excuse during these last 3 months for not having done that. I finished my BA last year in November. Probably one of the most disappointing things about this lockdown is that my graduation was cancelled, which I was really looking forward to. And that's the disappointment that I'm going to have to put up with, but I've taken the opportunity to go onto YouTube to learn new skill sets with regards to our industry, and I've been amazed at how successful institutions and football clubs and people are so willing to share, and I think that's something that we must learn from, is to be able to share with other people their knowledge. And it's like the old saying, it's very true, when you get into an elevator, you've got to take somebody with you. And as South Africans, we've got to learn to do that. I don't think there's enough of that within our society for a number of reasons. Yeah, look, I mean, like goalkeepers, defenders get better with age, and that's because from when I was 5 years old, you are constantly learning your skill set. South African footballers are generally late bloomers because of our lack of development from grassroots football, from amateur levels, and so I played my best football towards the end of my career. And that wasn't ideal, but that's generally the case for most defenders and goalkeepers from an experience point of view. So in other words, you've experienced every possible scenario that could possibly come up. Nothing at all surprises you anymore. And so I'd learned from my previous experience, my previous mistakes. and that very similarly to business, I should imagine. When you start off in business, you've got to learn from those mistakes, but don't be afraid to make them. Otherwise, you don't want perfection straight away. You simply want progress, and that's what people have got to aim for. So if I can compare that to an entrepreneur, that's probably the best way of describing it. And don't be afraid to make those mistakes. Otherwise, I would have given up. I wouldn't have progressed as a 21-year-old. I would have been stuck in the same mindset and with the same amateurish skill set. So I wasn't afraid of making those mistakes and learning from my peers. So I was very fortunate when I left amateur football in Cape Town. I was playing for a football club called Fishhook, and I moved to Cape Town Spurs, my first professional club. And I had the likes of Ronnie Zondi, Michael Jacobs, Sean Bartlett, David Modise. They were an incredibly skillful team at that stage. So I was rather fortunate as a youngster to fall into that group. And to have, that was all very well and good, but to have personalities in that group who would come up to a youngster and put their arm around you or take you under their wing and show you the ropes, again, was very fortunate on my part that I had older, more experienced players who were willing to do that. Again, when I left Cape Town Spurs and I moved to Mamelodi Sundowns, I had the late Jos Magalejo, Daniel Mudau, players of that caliber who again did something very similar, and it was, for example, Jos Magalejo was playing in my position, so we were actually competition. We were supposed to be rivals for that position, but he was the first one to come and greet me and make me feel at home. And again, within the business world and just general society in South Africa, I don't feel that there are enough of those mentors and people that are willing to welcome new and, more importantly, independent voices within their space. I find that generally leaders and people in management are rather protective of their space. There's not enough of that, welcoming the new generation and showing them the ropes. It's almost like the younger person always has to fight or to plot, plan, and that shouldn't be the case. The best athletes, I feel, are the ones that don't really have much of an imagination. When you take a flight, for example, when you're flying an aeroplane, your imagination sometimes takes over, and that can be quite frightening. So sometimes it's better to be a passenger without that imagination, so you have a nice uneventful passage. And very similar to athletes, it's important for us to block out all of that negative energy, and then at the same time make sure that you can welcome all the positive energy. And it's a very difficult thing to do, especially when you're inside a stadium full of 70,000-80,000 people and you're having a poor game and they're all booing. How do you block that out? It's very, very difficult. For myself personally, especially with journalists, when they used to write negative remarks or comments about me, I would cut out those articles and keep them very close to me, and I would use that to ignite something within me and to basically fire me up, so that my next performance is driven on that very same article. So I use that negativity in a very positive way, and that certainly helped me, especially towards the latter stages of my career. It gave me that extra adrenaline boost. So no matter what negativity comes your way, it can always be changed around for your own good. I had a bit of a profile, a bit of a legacy that I left on the football field. Not many footballers are able to do that, and generally footballers struggle with what I call the afterlife, and the transition is not smooth. It's not smooth at all. In fact, the statistics are that 75% of ex-footballers, both in Europe and here in South Africa, 5 years after retirement, will be either bankrupt, divorced, drug or alcohol dependent, or a mixture of all of those. So it's a very tough. It's not all glamour, trust you me. The transition into retirement is very difficult for most of us, and it's something that we struggle to deal with. And as footballers, we like to blame SAFA, we like to blame the clubs, but ultimately the players, as soon as they sign their very first professional contract, they've got to start thinking about retirement and the afterlife. And more often than not, players miss that savings point because we only have 15-20 years to maximize our earnings, unlike people in the public sector or job blogs who can work until he's 65 and enjoy the pension afterwards. We're not in that situation, and we have to get out of that mentality where our careers will last forever, because I was never the best footballer when I was younger. I was never the best footballer when I was older or grew more experience. There were always, for example, in my amateur team, there were always 3 or 4 boys who were always better than me. But I was determined. Now these are skill sets which when I talk to young people, this is my mantra, determination, perseverance, listening to the coach, being on time, are skills which cannot really be taught, but are probably even more important than your ball skills or your dribbling skills or your shooting skills or your speed, because the pool of talent these days, globally and here in South Africa, the pool of talent is so tight and so small that often those characteristics of yours are what determines whether you make it or not. So I certainly played on those. I was always the first to arrive at training, always the last to leave. I was always on time. I was fairly disciplined. I looked my coach and my trainer and manager in the eye when he spoke to me, so that he knew that I was taking in the instruction or the admonishment or whatever it was. And so I made sure that those characteristics were well set within me, and it also helped that I was very competitive. I didn't like losing. And again, that in the business world as an entrepreneur, that's something which you should also believe firmly in. Always be competitive. I think first of all, realizing that our career was very short, and therefore I had to maximize my earnings as much as possible. And to be able to do that, I had to look after my body. When I went out for a night out, I did it at the right time. When I had a drink, I did it at the right time. So timing is everything, I feel. Especially when as a footballer, when you train for 2.5 hours a day, you come back home, you're very tired. You can't go out shopping straight away. You can't go walking in the mall straight away. You've got to be able to tell your wife or your partner, look, I need to recharge. I can't do it right now. Give me a couple of hours. Those are the kinds of small things that athletes need to take into consideration. When you're younger, you feel that you're invincible, and sometimes players don't realize that kind of lifestyle. If you don't treat yourself well enough, that catches up to you. And instead of playing until you're 35, 40 years, you end up burning out at 28, 29. And so you're not able to maximize your potential. And again, that's very similar to any entrepreneur or business or industry. That's life in general. You've got to look after yourself and know when and who you're going to hang around with, and just do things at the right time. And for example, when I retired, we had this trust which we had been up and running since 2009, and when it was time to approach corporates for sponsorship, I couldn't even write up a proposal. I didn't know how to, so again, small things like that, you had to glean information off from people who are willing to give you a template for something like that. And so I was humbled in ways which you cannot believe. Just something as simple as drawing up a letter or proposal to a corporate, asking them for sponsorship or showing them what we've done as an organization, is something that I struggled with. And I'm lucky to have brought a profile with me where I've got a big enough black book and book of contacts to ask for help. And again, if you have those contacts, don't be afraid to approach them and to ask for advice in whatever it is. People will often surprise you. Don't be afraid to do that. Yeah, I think because I'm 2 meters tall, and because of that, I was never the quickest. I think any striker that had a low center of gravity, who could use both left and right feet, was always a difficult opponent to come up against. I remember playing against Mambush, Daniel Mabadao, Siabong Nombete, Jabo Pule, were all players who I didn't fear playing against them, but certainly you had to up your game. You had to make sure you went to bed early the night before, made sure that you had a good meal, looked after yourself, and made sure that you were in tip-top shape to come up against those types of players. Yeah, so early on in my profession, I had a couple of old school English coaches who always used to tell me that the very first challenge, the very first tackle that you make in a game, you have to leave an impression on your opponent. It sets the tone, and so I always attempted to do that. Whether I got the ball or not, it didn't really make a difference, but that was the part of the intimidation that a defender has to portray. As I became older, I wasn't necessarily able to do that, but I think then your reputation precedes you, and guys, some of them are quite wary, but then you get strikers who are fearful, so you begin to know your opponents and who's who in the zoo, and it's important to do your homework and know who you're coming up against the weekend. I would love to be able to encourage the younger generation to not fall into the trap of being yes men, and when they become independent, when they become leaders themselves, to welcome independent thinkers to surround you, and not just protect your turf with what I call bobbleheads, guys or girls who just say yes, boss, yes, boss. You've got to surround yourself with people who are independent thinkers, so that your organization and your business can thrive. Because at the moment, I'm afraid, we don't have that scenario, whether it's in government and in the private sector. And if we can knock that on its head, the nepotism and the cronyism, then we're on our way to a much brighter future. So yeah, I would leave you with that.